A lot of these tips may help you with your crafting even if you aren't a Cricut user, so make sure that you stick around to the end for my number 1 top tip. At number 22, we have a tip for different kinds of transfer tape. Now, different types of vinyls have different strengths and therefore will need different strength transfer tapes. You may have struggled with a glitter or a shimmer vinyl if you use the Cricut brand. Some of the vinyls may not quite stick to your transfer tape, and this may be because you're not using a transfer tape that is strong enough. There are 3 main different strengths of transfer tape. Number 1 would be your low tack. This is normally used for surfaces on when you're working on cars and things like that, as well as many other of your normal permanent vinyls. Medium tack of transfer tape is also very much interchangeably with the light grip in most kinds of vinyls, but when it comes to your strong grip, that's one that you would need to use with your shimmer and some even glitter vinyls. Tip number 21 is to use a brayer, mostly used when you're working with paper, but you can use your brayer with vinyl as well. What the brayer does is it helps to make sure that whatever you're cutting is solidly stuck onto your mat. Now that's really important because if it's not stuck onto your mat properly, you will get the paper ripping up and you will see that your projects will essentially look terrible. Coming off the back of that one, we have tip number 20. This one is important because if you haven't extended the lifespan of your mat, then even using a brayer won't help you with your projects ripping up when they cut. And how you can extend the lifespan of your mat is by cleaning it regularly. You can simply use dishwashing liquid. I'm not going to say that all dishwashing liquids work because I have not tried it on all of them. However, I have successfully used sunlight liquid here in South Africa, and I know that you can use Dawn dish soap for those of you in the US. Make sure to very lightly rub your mat with some dishwashing liquid and a little bit of water with a soft sponge to get all of the grit off. And then you can leave it in the sun for a little while just to make sure that it dries off, and your mat should pretty much be back to new. Just a little note, I'm not one of those people that suggests to re-sticky your mat. That is a horrible process and I have had awful results. I do not like it. So in my opinion, if you've had your mat for a couple of years and you've cleaned it regularly, dispose of it properly, maybe even recycling it if you can, and buy a new one. Now, tip number 19 is also about mat care, and that would be to save the mat protector that comes with your mat. It is a clear sheet of plastic that fits on top of your mat. The Cricut brand sheet protector is actually slightly larger than the sticky area, which makes it really nice to be able to very easily place it back onto the mat. And that perfectly leads into tip number 18, and that would be to put a vinyl decal onto your mat protector. Because your mat protector is clear, I cannot explain how many times I've placed my mat protector down somewhere on my table and then spent the next 5 minutes looking for it. You're probably laughing because you've done it too. So by putting a little decal on there, or sometimes if I've cut a heat transfer vinyl project and I haven't had a chance to apply it yet, I sometimes stick that onto my mat, and that is another way of saving a heat transfer vinyl project as well as not losing track of your mat protector. Tip number 17. In order to make sure that you are saving the lifespan of your mats, if you're cutting with your fabric mat on things like felt, or if you're using the foil quill, or if you're using, any kind of foil products, I would recommend using some transfer tape on your mat. Use the transfer tape sticky side up, and then you place whatever it is that you want to cut or your foil onto your transfer tape. Now, what this does is it means that the stickiness of the transfer tape will then get the foil or the majority of the fibers that you're busy cutting on your fabric mat, and it'll actually extend the lifespan of your mat a little bit more and mean that you have to clean it a little bit less. I wouldn't recommend using this for all products. If you're just doing vinyl or paper or something like that, just keep it as is. But if you're doing the foil or, felt kind of products, even leather as well, that give off a lot of stuff on your mat, this is definitely a way to help you extend the lifespan of your mat. Tip number 16. When you get a brand new mat, the tack on your standard grip mats may be a little bit too severe. So if you're using it for certain items, then it may actually damage some of your items. So I recommend taking the protective sheeting off and dabbing it against your clothes a little bit, just to put a tiny little amount of fibers onto the actual mat itself so that the stickiness isn't as severe, so when you place something onto it, so that you're not going to rip your materials. Tip number 15 is to try and not always use the same spot on your mat. When you're sending a design to cut in the Make It panel, it'll always align your design in the top left-hand corner. Now by using the top right-hand corner or the bottom left-hand corner, those are the two spaces on the mat that are probably used the least, and obviously the center. So if you're using those 3 spots essentially, then you will probably be extending the lifespan of your mat a little bit more, and you'll be able to stretch it a little bit further in between cleanings. Tip number 14 is to cut multiple colors on the same mat. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. Number 1 is on the color sync panel in Cricut Design Space. You can drag everything to a single color and cut it all like that. Or by selecting the object that you want to move, selecting the 3 dots on the top left hand corner and select move object. Now you'll be able to move it to a different mat so that when you are cutting multiple different colors, you can place things on the top left, top right, bottom left and bottom right hand corners of your mat, and you'll be able to cut everything in one go without having to load your mat multiple times. So tip number 13 is to have more than 1 mat of the same color. So you would have 2 light grip mats or blue mats, 2 green mats or standard mats. I mean, you may not need the strong grip mats, so those 2 are pretty much the ones that I would recommend. And it's something that I have struggled with when I was a newbie to Cricut and I was cutting multiple different layered projects. You would have to load multiple different colors one after the other when you're cutting something that's, you know, like a 12 by 12. And I would only have 1 mat. So I would cut the 1 mat, take it off, and then have to remove everything off that mat, scrape off all the little bits. Only then could I load the next color and load the next mat to start cutting, and then I would sit there and do nothing while I wait. By having 2 mats, you're able to make things go a little bit faster if you're cutting items that have multiple layers in them, and it's also nice to not have to wash your mats as often, so you can wash your mats, you know, every 6 months as opposed to every 3 months or so, which is a little bit nice. Tip number 12 is to always make sure that you're doing test cuts on new materials. If you're cutting something new, you don't want to go immediately onto cutting a full intricate 12 by 12 mandala, because if your cut settings aren't correct, you've either cut all the way through the backing or you haven't cut through enough, and you would have then unfortunately wasted a 12 by 12 of your materials. So by doing a test cut, you can save yourself a lot of hassle in the long run. If you aren't sure on how to do test cuts properly or change your custom materials, I will link a video up in the top for you to check out. At number 11, we have probably quite a widely debated tip, and this one, in my opinion, is a little bit unorthodox. So many people recommend to stab a ball of foil with your Cricut blade to sharpen/clean it. Now the Cricut blade itself is made from German carbide steel. Aluminium unfortunately is significantly softer than that and will not sharpen your blade. And the reason this may seem to work is because puncturing the ball of foil probably removes the adhesive, any gunk that's stuck on the actual blade itself, thereby essentially cleaning it. However, in my mind, this is a little bit of a roundabout way of doing this, and I have little alcohol wipes that I find do the job much quicker, much easier, and with a lot less waste. So I take a very small little alcohol swab, tear it open, and give my blade a little bit of a wipe down to remove any of the buildup or debris that is on the blade itself. This cleans it a lot quicker and better so that you can do better cuts in the future. And in the number 10 spot, we have the Cricut pens. It's no secret that the Cricut pens are one of my favorite things, and I have quite a few of them. My tip here is to store the pen's cap down. Now it is a little bit strange that when you buy the Cricut pens, they get sold to you cap up. So what I would do is, if you want to use them straight away, is to turn them and to store them upside down. Now the reason for that is because they're essentially felt tip pens, so if you store them with the cap up, all of the ink runs down to the bottom of the pen, and it may impact the longevity of your pens or how you're going to be using them long term. By storing them cap down, the ink is permanently down at the bottom, which means that the felt tip is always saturated, so they'll be ready to use and they'll be perfect for much longer. At number 9, we have storage of all of our Cricut blades. Now this is probably going to be a bigger one for all of those of you that have the Cricut Maker or the Cricut Maker 3, as obviously this comes with the quick swap housing and multiple different blade attachments. But in the fold down tray of the Cricut Maker, there's a little fold up bulk tray. And in this little space you can store many different things, and what I've actually done is I've actually 3D printed a storage tray for this, and it looks super cool. But if you don't have a 3D printer, you can also cut one out of felt. So I will leave the links to the STL of the 3D printed trays, and I will also leave the design ID of the felt tray as well, so that you can cut one with your maker. You can also store your blades in the little magnet section on the left hand side, which is super useful. Tip number 8 is to optimize your media for when you're actually cutting something. And I'm not gonna lie, it's not something that I remember to do every time, and I get a little bit annoyed with myself. Because with the way the Cricut design space works, when you send something to cut, so you send it to the Make It panel, and if you were to organize it on the send screen, it doesn't save that. So if you have a design that you want to cut a few times, every time you cut that design or every time you open it again and you want to cut it, you're gonna have to do exactly the same thing over and over again by organizing it, moving all the objects, those kinds of things. But if you organize it in the design panel and actually attach the design, then you can save that as a project and you won't ever have to worry about doing that ever again. So you optimize it for your media cut size once, and then you don't have to worry again. It is a tip that has saved me a lot of time. Tip number 7 is for those of us that love weeding, and it is a little nail polish bottle holder that fits very nicely on our fingers, and we can use it as a place to store our vinyl scrap that we're weeding out. Weeding is a process by removing the negative space on the page that we've just cut, so obviously there's lots of little sticky bits everywhere that constantly get in the way, so we're going to need a place to store those, because if they get back onto your page, then you try and pull them up and it stretches the vinyl and it drives me nuts. So by having this little nail polish holder, it'll really save you. And it's really inexpensive. I think mine was about 20 or 30 Rand. For those of you in the US, you can probably find them at the dollar store or obviously most nail polish stores, and they are very inexpensive. I will leave a link to an Amazon product down in the description. Tip number 6 is to flip your mat over when removing your project. Now this will save you probably quite a bit of hassle if you're working specifically with paper products, but it's also very appropriate if you're working with adhesive vinyl. Especially if you're using a standard grip mat, if you pull whatever you're cutting off the mat, it will curl. And then it could potentially mess up your cut, it could mess up your design, or if you're using paper, you may struggle to get it to lay flat again. So by pulling the mat off the thing that you've just cut, you will avoid this problem pretty much entirely. Tip number 5. Now this is something that I haven't seen many people sharing, and for me it's quite important. So we all know that we have little vinyl scrapers, and these things are great. They are very good to use, but they leave a lot of scratches on your vinyl. So by putting a little bit of adhesive felt onto the edge of your scraper, you really avoid getting scratches on your vinyl. This shouldn't change too terribly much when it comes to actually, scraping the vinyl off or getting the transfer tape to stick to the vinyl. It'll just help for when you're actually scraping the vinyl itself, that nothing really scratches it and that it stays in pristine condition. Tip number 4. If you're using an old mat, you may need to tape your vinyl down a little bit. If your mat is kind of on the verge of being cleaned and it's not quite sticking all that well, a little bit of painter's tape or washi tape or sellotape will really help solve that problem. I wouldn't recommend doing this for paper, as you will still need the paper to stick down absolutely everywhere for it to work properly, and it may not be recommended for super intricate cuts either. Tip number 3 is to store your vinyl and paper offcuts. I very often see people wasting a lot of vinyl and they pull off massive sections of vinyl, and I get a little bit panicky because they're wasting so much vinyl and they could use that for another project. And I constantly find myself going to my vinyl scraps folder. I have 3. I have one for HTV, I have one for adhesive vinyl, and I have another one for paper scraps. I typically use it for the larger pieces of scraps, not the very small bits. And I'm constantly looking through those to see if I have any offcut pieces that I can use instead of cutting off another piece off a larger roll. Tips 1 and 2 are not things that I've seen very often in these videos, so I especially wanted to include them and make sure that you guys have absolutely everything that you need to really succeed on your Cricut journey. So tip number 2 is to join groups on Facebook for help. Now, you would always need to take these with a little pinch of salt, as some people can be a little bit nasty when they're replying to some questions, but really shake that off. Don't let it bother you. They've all been there at the beginner stages as well, and there are some really great groups on Facebook that will help you all the way through whatever project you need, and even give you great advice and tips along the way. My number one best tip for your Cricut or crafts in general is there is pretty much nothing that you can't learn for free on YouTube. Yes, having personalized help, having one-on-one classes that you buy is extremely helpful, and it will definitely help you get there faster. If it is something that you are interested in doing, please check out my Buy Me a Coffee link in the description, as I have set up a few one-on-one class offers there. Like I said, there is nothing that you can't learn for free on YouTube. There are so many different videos out there for whatever it is that you want to learn. And with a little bit of searching, with a little bit of Googling, you will definitely be able to find out whatever information you want. Like I said, it might take you just a little bit longer, but you'll definitely be able to get there. And I have absolute faith in you. So I hope that these tips have been super helpful, and that they are getting you on your way to the most amazing crafts ever. And I hope to see you in my next video. So subscribe to my channel for more Cricut and craft related videos in the future. And remember, be kind to someone today. See you soon.